just in case anybody needs to figure out how to do this at some point, we're going to pull the tail off this bike and show you all the steps involved. So first thing is starting with the side covers. They have a little Allen or whatever hardware the previous owner used. Also, I really like keeping little metal trays everywhere, that way I don't lose the hardware for everything. So, little Allens on both sides. Then there's a bigger Allen in the factory way of doing this, and thanks previous owner, there's big Phillips here, but normally you would expect to find big fat Allens. So take the screws out on both sides of the seat, that way the seat can come up. Come on. And then the seat will just lift off, the front comes up, and then the back unhooks. Put that aside somewhere. My garage is a disaster. And then while I have a Phillips out, there are a couple of things in the tail that are Phillips. There are a couple of things that are regular bolts. And then there's some push pins. So there's a Phillips little screw holding the two halves together. So take that out. There's also a push pin, and the trick with these push pins is to poke the middle of it. Usually works. Poke the middle of it so it goes in, and then it should wiggle out. This was not a particularly successful attempt. Let's do it on this one. So if you poke the middle of it, the middle will sit inside, and then you can just get a fingernail or a small flathead or something in there and pull it up. Small flatheads are your friend. So if you put the middle in, what happens with these pins when you install them, they have the middle sticking out. When you push it in, let me see if I can show this in my hand. When you push it in, the little lips on it spread out, and that's how it's held into place. But then when you push it in deeper, it goes past it, and the little lips close back down. All right, so there's a couple more push pins underneath. There would be, on a stock bike, there would be a little colored T-piece here. Push the middles of them in. Somehow these are really sticky, so I have to pretty much pry all of them, but on most bikes I can just pull them out. And then down the side of the fairing, you would have more of these. This one has some different kind of bodywork pin. All right, that one broke. No big deal. They're cheap. And if they break, you know, if the hat's ripped off, it doesn't matter. Then I'll figure out how to do these. I'm thinking they're just put something behind it. Maybe not. So pins are out. Then there's a couple of Phillips that hold the bodywork. Can get them up and out of the way. Then there's the seat latch, which has these long Phillips with an angle at the end. And then lastly, there is the seat latch cable has a mount, which is just the regular Allen. At this point, you can pull the latch off and kind of get it unhooked from the cable. And then there is a 12mm a bolt that goes on the grab bar. So get those out. And then sometimes the grab bar will be kind of stuck in there because it has little bosses that go into the rubber grommets here. This one came out pretty easily, but if it gets stuck, you just kind of wiggle it and it comes out. Not a big deal. Alright, so we have the front, middle, and rear bolts out. We have the push pins out. We have the Phillips up front out. And at this point, the bodywork should kind of wiggle already. If you have any weird zip ties, that's probably a good time to cut them off. And then the last thing you're going to need to do is unplug the tail light, which in this case there's a bit of a jungle there. If you have turn signals that are attached to the bodywork, you probably want to unplug those. Tail light is this big 3-prong white plug. Get that out. License plate light. Usually under normal circumstances you don't need to unplug this to pull the tail, but in this case it's attached to the bodywork, so it's probably going to need to come off. And then unplug all the turn signal wiring. So basically you want to make sure all the wiring you've got going on is disconnected. I am not sure what this blue wire is. It's going up to something, but based on where it's plugged into, it's probably a tap for a relay or something, or some light. And because it was actually soldered, I'm going to cut it off, and when I'm putting it back together I'm going to solder it later. Soldering is easy. Alright, so hopefully by now all your lighting items are more or less unplugged. If you have a plate bracket, you may need to disconnect it, maybe not. So once the bodywork can wiggle and slide out, you're trying to take the whole tail apart. Don't try to take a side off the back. It just really never works well. And it's all you're doing is kind of wiggling it back and forth to give it some room to get off the bike, and then sliding it back. So that's the tail coming off in one big piece. Watch for these little little metal spacers. They sit inside the mounts. And I guess we can set this aside for now. Let's put it in a spot where I'm guaranteed to step on it. So for this bike, because we need to pull, what is going on? There's a mile of wire here. Because we want to pull the subframe as well, I'm going to start with that. So the couple of things, if you're messing with anything electrical, if you're taking apart half the bike, wow, there's a mile of stuff here. Start with the negative terminal. Just get the bike to be dead. That way, if you touch anything that's live against the frame, you're not gonna blow fuses or blow up anything. So get the battery out of the way. That way you have space to work. This is oddly greasy. Set that aside. And then for the subframe's held, the undertail's held onto the subframe with 4 bolts on the side. And then some bikes will have this bracket holding it onto the rear set, and then the passenger pegs. So I'm going to pull all those out. May need to get the harness out of the way a little bit to do it. This is surprisingly crowded. My garage is not ready to do 2 bikes simultaneously, but that's exactly what we're doing today. I don't know where that bolt went. Oh, right here. Excellent. Alright, so there's a bunch of zip ties going on. There's a bunch of wiring somebody did for who the hell knows what. I'm going to take it all off, and then we'll rerun it later when we put the other bike together. So get all that stuff nice and loose, unplug anything you can get your hands on, just to make sure that things come out easily. Unplug the ECU. Here. And then those 4 bolts holding the undertail that we took out, they're kind of hooked to the frame, so just pull out and the undertail should drop down off the subframe. So now, under normal circumstances, we would be able to wiggle it out if we pulled all the stuff out of it. Right now, I need this subframe for the other bike, and I guess I'm just going to pull the subframe and go from there. Do everything in one video. So there's these pins for the harness going into the subframe. You can just pry them out. Usually they break, but they're also not particularly important. If you're trying to take apart everything, you can start unhooking connectors. If you're just trying to leave all the wiring in place, you don't have to. And then the subframe, is going to fight me a little bit right now, because it's going to be held on to. All right, let's. There's no way I can get in there with that. It's going to be held on to the. It's going to be held onto the frame with a couple of bolts,
and a flathead. That was me.
And a flat what?
If you're talking about that.
No, that's not it. That's so the subframe's held on by these two bolts. As you start loosening it, it's gonna get. On most bikes, it's going to get progressively more misaligned. So the last bolt is usually... Oh, we got lucky. But the last bolt usually doesn't want to go because it's tweaked, so you actually have to support the subframe a little bit and get it get it to a point where it's not crossed up. So you're pulling the bolts straight. Still too short. We need a longer extension. So come up from underneath and unbolt this bracket. Should come right out. And lastly, I need to get the passenger pegs off so that I can take the sv1000 pegs on. All right, and that is probably it for things holding the subframe. So I'm going to gently start shaking it around and untangling the harness out of it. Of course, we're running in circles. Now that's an awesome previous owner moment right here. We have a wire that's clamped to a fuse that I'm sure is feeding something. Or soldered. So I'm gonna see if I can pull the fuse with this contraption. Yeah. So that's a wire that's hooked to a fuse. Interesting. Haven't seen that one before. I guess it's probably better than a wire nut. But I think I would do something else if that were my bike I were putting together. Miles and miles of wire, miles and miles of aftermarket stuff. It's all nice and tangled on itself. There's that blue wire again. And there goes the subframe, except it's stuck to a simultaneously ground and positive wire, because black and white on this bike means ground, red in every place in the world means positive, and somehow it's all wrapped around itself. Heat warning, turn off power and allow 5 minutes to cool before handling. Okay, I think we did that. I don't know how this comes apart. What is it anyway? Track Day Electronics Suzuki gear position display. This is like complete overkill in every way possible, because you could have just plugged in a GoPro, but here you have something with like a Cat 5 cable and a mile of power going everywhere. And you know what? I can solder or crimp or just not put this back on, because whatever. Anyway, so now I think almost the subframe's off and we can put it on the other bike. Yeah, I guess that's going to be the plan. Yeah, please.